I was always a man of routine, and Ella, my wife, seemed to thrive on the predictability of our life together. We'd been married for 9 years, a good run, or so I thought. Ella was passionate about fitness, and the gym became her sanctuary. I admired her discipline, the way she carried herself with confidence, and her glow after a workout. I believed it was her commitment to herself, to us. How wrong I was. It started with small things, details that didn't add up. Ella had begun spending more time at the gym, sometimes twice a day. She laughed off my teasing about her becoming a gym rat, telling me she just wanted to stay in the best shape of her life. At first, I was proud of her dedication. Then, she started coming home later, claiming she was catching up with gym friends or helping a new member with their routine. There were changes in her behavior too. Her phone, which had always been an open book, now stayed glued to her hand. She laughed at messages she refused to share and took calls in hushed tones, leaving the room whenever they came through. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I chalked it up to her needing personal space. One evening, she came home smelling like cologne, not mine. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, saying she'd hugged one of the gym trainers as a thank you for helping her with a workout plan. Something about her tone made my stomach knot. It wasn't the words, but the ease with which she dismissed my concern. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how distant Ella had become. She was glued to her phone late into the night, texting away with a smile she never wore when talking to me. I tried to talk to her, but she brushed me off, saying I was paranoid. I felt the growing void between us, but couldn't put my finger on what was driving it. One day, curiosity got the better of me. I checked our shared bank account to see if there were any strange charges. Sure enough, I found multiple transactions from a cafe near the gym, all during hours when Ella was supposed to be home. Confronting her led to a heated argument where she accused me of being controlling. I backed off, but the doubt gnawed at me. Then came the breaking point. A close friend, who also went to the same gym, texted me late one evening. His message was brief, but hit like a sledgehammer. "We need to talk about Ella. It's bad." My hands trembled as I typed back, asking him to explain. He refused over text, insisting we meet the next day. I didn't sleep that night, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The next day, over coffee, he dropped the bombshell. Ella wasn't just cheating. She was doing it with multiple men, all regulars at the gym. "It's a mess," he said, his voice low and apologetic. "People are starting to talk. I thought you should know." I sat there in stunned silence, my coffee untouched. How could the woman I loved betray me like this? And with such reckless abandon? Rage and heartbreak warred within me, but one thing became clear. I needed proof, not just hearsay. The coffee shop felt suffocating after what I had learned. Every word my friend had said echoed in my head as I left, trying to process the betrayal. The Ella I thought I knew was a stranger now, her laughter, her touch, even her scent, all tainted by her lies. But I couldn't just confront her with rumors. I needed undeniable proof, something that would shatter her web of deceit. That night, I stayed up, formulating a plan. I ordered a small, discreet camera online and spent hours learning how to set it up. The gym had always been Ella's domain, but if the rumors were true, it was also the scene of her betrayal. I chose a camera disguised as a smoke detector. It was subtle, the kind of thing no one would question. I didn't know yet how I'd install it, but I was determined to uncover the truth. The next day, I casually asked Ella about her plans. She mentioned another late session at the gym, and I nodded, pretending to be indifferent. She didn't notice the way my jaw tightened, or the way my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Once she left, I grabbed the camera and drove to the gym. The place was packed, the rhythmic clinking of weights and the hum of treadmills masking my nervousness. I spotted a maintenance ladder in the corner and realized this was my chance. Acting like I belonged there, I climbed up under the guise of adjusting a vent and carefully installed the camera in the ceiling of the main workout area. The placement was perfect. It would capture everything. For the next week, I waited. Ella's gym visits became my battleground, each one a mix of anger and dread. I avoided her at home, unable to look her in the eye, afraid of what I might say. When she asked if I was okay, I mumbled excuses about work stress. I needed to keep her off my scent until I had the evidence I needed. Finally, the day came. With trembling hands, I retrieved the footage from the camera. I sat in my car, my laptop perched on the dashboard, and hit play. The first few minutes were uneventful, just the usual gym-goers lifting weights and chatting. Then I saw her. Ella walked in, radiant and confident, like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched as she approached a group of men, laughing and touching their arms in ways that were far too familiar. My heart sank when one of them, tall, muscular, and arrogant, pulled her into a corner. There, right in front of everyone, they kissed. And it didn't stop there. The footage was damning. Ella wasn't just cheating. She was flaunting it, as if our marriage didn't matter. Worse, she wasn't just with one man. There were several over the course of the footage, all of them treating her like some kind of prize to be passed around. I sat there, numb, watching my life crumble on a screen. But as the shock faded, something else took its place: determination. She thought she'd humiliated me? She had no idea what was coming next. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. As I sat in my car staring at the damning footage, my emotions simmered into something colder, sharper: resolve. Ella had betrayed me, mocked our marriage, and flaunted her infidelity. Now, it was time to turn the tables. I wouldn't lash out impulsively. That wasn't my style. No, if I was going to respond, it would be with precision. The first step was securing the evidence. I copied the footage onto multiple drives, ensuring I had backups. If I confronted her too early, she might try to manipulate the situation or play the victim. I wouldn't give her that chance. This time, the truth would speak louder than her lies. The second step was deciding what to do next. Confrontation wasn't enough. Ella had already shown she didn't respect me or our relationship. No, I needed to hit her where it would hurt most: her reputation. She had wrapped herself in the image of a disciplined, health-conscious, gym-loving woman. If the truth came out, it would shatter that facade and expose her for what she truly was. But I couldn't just release the footage recklessly. It had to be deliberate, impactful, and irreversible. I spent the next few days gathering more information. It wasn't just about Ella, it was about everyone involved. I started looking into the men she'd been with, their social media profiles, their gym memberships, and their connections to her. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. Some of them were married, others had girlfriends, and all of them had been complicit in this betrayal. They weren't just wrecking my life, they were wrecking their own homes, too. Meanwhile, I pretended everything was normal at home. Ella continued her gym sessions and late nights, completely unaware that her web of lies was unraveling. She even had the nerve to kiss me goodbye one evening, saying, "You've been so understanding lately. I love you." Her words made my stomach turn, but I forced a smile and nodded. Let her think she had the upper hand. Then came my first act of vengeance. One evening, while she was at the gym, I accessed her phone. She'd left it charging in the living room. A rookie mistake. I bypassed the passcode easily. After all, we'd shared passwords for years. There, I found the text threads that confirmed everything. Explicit messages, plans to meet up, even photos. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had mocked me with her lovers, laughing at how clueless I was. I forwarded every incriminating message to myself and deleted the evidence of my access. But I didn't stop there. I sent anonymous messages to a few key people, the wives and girlfriends of the men involved. I attached screenshots of the texts, keeping it brief: "You deserve to know the truth." The fallout began almost immediately. My phone buzzed with angry replies from women demanding more details, while others thanked me for exposing their cheating partners. Ella still had no idea what I'd done. But this was only the beginning. The first signs of Ella's unraveling came a few days after I sent the messages. At dinner, she was quieter than usual, pushing her food around on her plate. Normally, she'd share some cheerful anecdote about her day, but this time, there was nothing. I didn't ask. Why would I? If she was starting to feel the tremors of what was coming, I wasn't about to give her a lifeline. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning casual concern. I had to bite back a smirk when she jumped at the sound of my voice. "Yeah, fine," she said too quickly, her eyes darting away from mine. "Just tired, I guess." She wasn't tired. She was nervous. She'd gotten one of those text messages. I was sure of it. The next day, Her phone rang incessantly. Normally, I'd hear her chatting away with her gym friends or laughing over some inside joke. Now, she either ignored the calls entirely or stepped out of the room to answer in hushed tones. I stayed out of her way, pretending to be absorbed in work. Let her squirm. I'd only just started. That evening, she came home from the gym looking more frazzled than I'd ever seen her. She didn't greet me with her usual nonchalance, didn't kiss my cheek, didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, she went straight to the bedroom and shut the door behind her. I waited a few minutes before creeping down the hall to eavesdrop. "Why would you send that to her?" she hissed, her voice barely audible. I could only make out fragments of the conversation, but it was clear she was speaking to one of her lovers. "What do you mean you don't know?" she snapped. "She's threatening to tell my husband. You promised this wouldn't blow up?" There it was, panic. She had no idea it was me who had lit the fuse. I backed away and headed to the living room, settling into the couch just as she stormed out. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking as she clutched her phone. "Everything all right?" I asked, as if I hadn't been listening to her meltdown. "Fine," she muttered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just drama at the gym." Drama? Huh? If only she knew how much worse it was going to get. Over the next few days, the tension in our house became suffocating. Ella was constantly on edge, glued to her phone, trying to put out fires she didn't know I'd started. Meanwhile, I carried on like everything was normal, pretending to be the doting husband who was too distracted with work to notice her unraveling. But behind the scenes, I was working on the next stage of my plan. It wasn't enough to expose her infidelity to her lover's partners. I needed the world to see who Ella really was. The gym had been her sanctuary, but soon it would become her downfall. The footage from the gym became my most valuable weapon. It wasn't just evidence of Ella's betrayal. It was a window into the arrogance she and her lovers flaunted. They carried on as though they were untouchable, laughing, flirting, and sneaking into corners, all while thinking no one was watching. Little did they know, the gym's ceiling held a silent witness to every stolen kiss and lingering touch. I spent hours editing the footage, carefully selecting the most incriminating clips. Each segment painted a damning picture. Ella's smile as she leaned into a man's embrace, the way she whispered into another's ear, and the casual way she'd leave the gym floor only to return disheveled minutes later. But I wasn't reckless. I blurred the faces of innocent bystanders, keeping the focus solely on Ella and her partners. This wasn't about collateral damage. It was about precision. With the video compiled, I prepared the next phase of my plan: distribution. An anonymous email account was the obvious choice, and I set up a burner account that couldn't be traced back to me. I compiled a list of recipients: Ella's family, her close friends, her gym acquaintances, and even a few people I knew would spread the news like wildfire. I didn't send the video just yet. I wanted the timing to be perfect. Meanwhile, Ella's world continued to crumble in small, satisfying ways. She started skipping meals, barely sleeping, and constantly checking her phone. The once confident woman who would breeze through the door after her workouts now shuffled in, her eyes darting nervously. One night, she turned to me at dinner, her voice shaky. "Have you noticed anything strange lately? Like, people acting weird around you?" I set down my fork and tilted my head, pretending to be confused. "No, why? Is something wrong?" She hesitated, chewing her bottom lip, a nervous tic I hadn't seen in years. "It's probably nothing. Just, I feel like someone's spreading rumors about me at the gym." I shrugged, feigning indifference. "I'm sure it's just gossip. You know how people are." She nodded, but the relief didn't reach her eyes. 2 days later, I sent the email. It was simple and to the point. Subject: the truth about Ella. Body: people deserve to know what really goes on. Watch the video. Attachment: the footage, edited into a concise, explosive 10-minute reel. I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed nonstop as Ella's family and friends began reaching out. I didn't answer any of them. I wanted Ella to deal with the mess she'd made. By the time she came home that evening, her face was pale, her hands trembling. "You," she started, her voice cracking. "You did this, didn't you?" I met her gaze calmly. Did what, Ella? Her phone buzzed again, and she flinched. The video. Everyone's seen it. My parents, my friends, even the gym owner. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe if you'd been honest, you wouldn't be in this position. For the first time, Ella looked truly afraid. The fallout from the video was far greater than I could have imagined. By the time Ella stormed into the house that night, her world was already crumbling around her. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the email went out. Family, friends, and gym acquaintances bombarded her with calls and messages. Each one chipped away at the facade she'd worked so hard to maintain. "What were you thinking?" she yelled, her voice trembling with fury. "You've ruined my life." I stayed seated, meeting her glare with quiet resolve. "No, Ella, you ruined your life. All I did was reveal the truth." She paced the room like a caged animal, running her hands through her hair as tears welled in her eyes. "My parents disowned me. My friends won't even pick up my calls. And the gym owner? He banned me. How could you do this to me?" "You brought this on yourself," I said calmly, standing up. "You lied, cheated, and disrespected our marriage. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" For a moment, she looked stunned, as though she couldn't comprehend that her actions had consequences. But then her expression hardened. "You didn't have to send it to everyone. You could have just confronted me. But no, you had to humiliate me." "Humiliate you?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "You humiliated me when you paraded around with those men, laughing behind my back. You didn't care about my feelings, our marriage, or the life we built. You didn't care about anything but yourself. Now, everyone sees the real you." Her defiance crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. "I made a mistake. I messed up." Her words felt hollow, too little, too late. I didn't feel pity. I felt vindicated. The days that followed were chaos for Ella. Her parents, who had always adored her, cut off contact. Her closest friends sent angry messages, accusing her of betrayal and selfishness. Even the gym community turned against her. The men she'd been involved with, her so-called partners, distanced themselves, terrified of the backlash. One of them even called me, begging me not to share the video further, afraid it would reach his wife. The worst came when Ella tried to return to the gym. I heard about it from my friend who had first tipped me off. She walked in like she belonged there, only to be met with cold stares and whispers. The gym owner himself escorted her out, telling her she was no longer welcome. At home, Ella became a ghost of herself. She spent most of her days in our bedroom, avoiding me entirely. But every so often, I caught her glancing at me with a mixture of anger and desperation, as though she couldn't decide whether to beg for forgiveness or lash out again. But forgiveness wasn't an option anymore. This wasn't just about what she did to me, it was about what she'd become. And I wasn't done yet. Ella's downfall should have felt like the end of my pain, a full stop at the end of a sentence written in betrayal. But instead, it felt like a comma, a pause before the next chapter began. Watching her crumble wasn't enough to heal the wounds she'd left on me. I realized I needed to reclaim something much bigger than vengeance, my own life. While Ella spiraled into damage control, I started to rebuild. The house, once a space filled with tension and lies, became my sanctuary again. I cleared out the reminders of her infidelity, the photos of us, her workout gear left scattered around the house, the trinkets she'd collected during her so-called health retreats that were really thinly veiled excuses for her escapades. I began to see our home as mine alone, not something shared with a woman who had shattered my trust. I reorganized, redecorated, and reclaimed the space for myself. The process was therapeutic, each removed item like a weight lifted off my shoulders. But it wasn't just the house I focused on. It was my body and mind, too. For years, I had let Ella's passion for fitness overshadow my own well-being. She'd always been the one at the gym, leaving me to work late and pick up the pieces at home. That was over. I signed up for a membership at a different gym, one Ella had never set foot in. The first day was intimidating. I wasn't as fit as I used to be, and it felt strange stepping into a world she had dominated. But I reminded myself I was doing this for me, not for her. Over time, the weights felt lighter, the treadmill less daunting. I began to see results, not just in my body but in my confidence. Outside the gym, I focused on reconnecting with the people Ella had pushed away during our marriage. Friends I hadn't seen in years were surprised but supportive when I reached out. They listened to my story, shared their own struggles, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. Slowly, I rebuilt my social circle, surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared. At work, I threw myself into projects with a renewed sense of purpose. For too long, I'd let my personal life distract me from my goals. Now, I felt sharper, more focused. My boss noticed the change and hinted at a promotion. It felt good to channel my energy into something productive. Ella, meanwhile, was a shadow of her former self. She no longer tried to argue or defend herself. She avoided me entirely, staying locked in the bedroom or disappearing for hours at a time. I didn't ask where she went or who she was with. It didn't matter anymore. I still had one final move to make, but I knew I needed to wait. The groundwork was laid, and I was starting to feel like myself again. But before I could truly move on, I had to finish what I started. Ella's spiral was as predictable as it was tragic. Her world, once carefully curated, had been dismantled piece by piece. She tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, clinging to her phone, pacing the house, and sending frantic texts to whoever might still take her side. It was almost sad to watch her grasp at the remnants of her life. Almost. One evening, she sat across from me at the dining table, her shoulders slumped in defeat. It was the first time in weeks she had voluntarily sought me out. Her once bright eyes were hollow, framed by dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. She looked like a stranger, a woman I barely recognized. "I need to talk to you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I set down my fork and met her gaze. "Go ahead." "I know I messed up," she began, wringing her hands nervously. I let things get out of control. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I raised an eyebrow. "Go this far?" "Ella, you didn't let this happen. You chose it, over and over again." She flinched, her face crumpling as tears filled her eyes. "I know," she whispered, "but I want to fix it. I want to fix us." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Fix us? Ella, there's no us left to fix. You burned that bridge the moment you decided our marriage didn't matter." Her tears fell freely now, and for a moment, I almost felt pity. But then I remembered the way she'd laughed with her lovers, the way she'd mocked me behind my back. Pity dissolved into resolve. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "we can go to therapy. I'll do anything. I'll quit the gym, delete my social media, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on me." I shook my head slowly, my expression cold. "Ella, you didn't just betray me. You humiliated me, lied to me, and destroyed the trust we had. Therapy can't fix that. Deleting your Instagram can't fix that. It's over." Her desperation shifted to anger in an instant. "You think you're so perfect? You think you've never made mistakes? You've been distant for years, always working late, never making me feel wanted." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me. I worked late to provide for us. I trusted you to be my partner, not a liability. You threw away our marriage, and now you're paying the price." She shrank back, her anger dissolving into sobs. I walked away, leaving her at the table, her cries echoing through the house. That night, I finalized the paperwork for our separation. It was time to make everything official. Ella's desperation was real, but so were her consequences, and no amount of tears or promises could undo what she had done. The decision to end the marriage, while clear in my mind, carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. As much as I hated what Ella had done, there was still a flicker of sorrow for the life we once had, for the person I thought she was. But those emotions couldn't outweigh the cold reality. She had shattered the foundation of our relationship. There was no repairing what she had destroyed. I met with a lawyer the next day, a sharp and efficient woman named Claire, who listened intently as I laid out my case. I handed her the evidence, the footage, the texts, and even the emails I'd received from Ella's lovers' spouses. Her expression didn't change as she flipped through it all, But when she looked up, there was a glint of something in her eyes. "This is damning," Claire said, leaning back in her chair. "With this much evidence, you're in a strong position. You could push for everything: house, assets, even spousal support if you wanted." I shook my head. "I don't want her money. I just want her out of my life." Claire nodded. "Understood. We'll aim for a clean break, but given the circumstances, she's not going to walk away unscathed." The next step was serving Ella the papers. I opted not to hand them to her myself. I couldn't trust myself to keep calm during that confrontation. Instead, I arranged for her to receive them at home while I was at work. When I returned that evening, the house was eerily silent. Ella sat on the couch, the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mixture of fury and despair. "You couldn't even talk to me before doing this," she snapped, her voice raw. "I tried to talk to you," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "For years. But you weren't listening. And now? There's nothing left to say." Her hands trembled as she picked up the papers. "So that's it? You're just going to throw everything away?" I laughed bitterly. "You threw everything away, Ella. I'm just picking up the pieces." She tried every tactic she could think of. First, she begged for another chance. Then, she raged, accusing me of being cold and vindictive. When that didn't work, she turned to manipulation, claiming she couldn't survive without me. But I stood firm, refusing to let her words sway me. The days that followed were filled with logistical nightmares. Dividing our assets, closing joint accounts, and arranging for her to move out of the house were emotionally exhausting. Ella's reluctance to cooperate only made things worse, but Claire handled it with ruthless efficiency. By the end of the week, Ella's belongings were packed into boxes, ready to be moved to a small apartment she had reluctantly rented. Watching her leave for the last time, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a quiet sense of triumph. It was over, but her reckoning wasn't. The day Ella moved out felt like the closing of a heavy door. For the first time in years, the house was mine alone, free from her lies and the tension that had poisoned every corner. I expected to feel more: anger, relief, maybe even regret. But instead, I felt a quiet calm. It was the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when you can finally survey the damage and start rebuilding. Ella, however, was not rebuilding. In the weeks following the divorce, her life began unraveling even faster. Without the stability of our shared life, she was adrift, struggling to keep her head above water. Her once lively social circle had evaporated. Friends who had eagerly joined her for gym sessions or brunches now avoided her entirely. Some didn't bother hiding their disdain, openly criticizing her betrayal. Others simply ghosted her, quietly severing ties to avoid the mess she had become. Word spread quickly about her banishment from the gym. The owner, furious over the fallout from the video, had made it clear she was no longer welcome. Her name became a punchline among the gym's regulars, a whispered cautionary tale about arrogance and betrayal. Her family's response was no better. Her parents, embarrassed and angry, had stopped taking her calls. They blamed her for tarnishing their family name, a humiliation they weren't willing to endure. Her younger sister, once her closest ally, sent her a blistering message: "You did this to yourself. Don't expect me to clean up your mess." Financially, she was floundering. Ella had leaned heavily on me during our marriage, relying on my steady income to support her lifestyle. Now, with a modest job and no access to my resources, she quickly realized how precarious her situation was. The apartment she'd rented was a far cry from the home we had shared. The sleek, modern furniture and airy spaces were replaced by worn carpets, cheap fixtures, and the hum of a neighbor's television bleeding through the walls. It wasn't long before she started making desperate attempts to claw her way back into my life. At first, she tried to play the sympathy card, sending me long messages filled with apologies and promises to change. When I didn't respond, her tone shifted. She accused me of being cruel, of destroying her life out of spite. But I didn't engage. Her lowest moment came when she showed up at the house unannounced, disheveled and teary-eyed. "Please," she begged, standing on the doorstep, "just give me a chance to explain. I didn't open the door. Through the security camera, I told her, "You've already explained enough. Go home, Ella." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But she turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, disappearing into the evening light. While Ella's world fell apart, mine grew brighter. I was thriving in my career, reconnecting with friends, and finding joy in the simple freedom of living on my own terms. Ella's collapse was no longer my concern. With Ella out of the house, I embraced the freedom I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Life no longer felt like I was walking on eggshells or pretending to ignore the growing cracks in my marriage. Now, every step felt lighter, every day brighter. I started by investing in myself. Fitness had once been Ella's domain, but now it became mine. The gym I joined was becoming my sanctuary, a place where I rebuilt not just my body but my confidence. I pushed myself harder than I thought I could, and the results were incredible. I shed the weight of stress, both physical and emotional, and felt stronger than I had in years. Socially, I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. Friday nights, once spent alone while Ella was working late, were now lively evenings with people who truly valued me. The camaraderie was refreshing, a stark contrast to the loneliness I'd felt in my marriage's final years. Work, too, flourished. I poured my focus into projects and landed a promotion that came with a corner office and a hefty pay raise. Colleagues who had once only known me as a reserved professional began to see my lighter side. I was finally free to be myself, and it felt good. Meanwhile, Ella's texts and calls became less frequent. Her initial desperation gave way to silence, and I imagined she'd finally accepted that there was no going back. What I didn't know was how wrong I was. Ella's life wasn't just unraveling, it was collapsing. Her small apartment, already a downgrade, became a place of isolation. Her attempts to reach out to former friends were met with cold indifference. Even the men from the gym who had once vied for her attention ghosted her entirely, fearing further association with her would damage their own lives. Financial struggles piled up quickly. Bills she'd ignored during the chaos of the divorce now loomed over her. Without me to cushion her lifestyle, she fell behind on rent. She took on a second job to make ends meet, working long hours that left her exhausted and frazzled. Emotionally, she was a wreck. Ella began frequenting bars, drinking alone to numb the pain. On more than one occasion, mutual acquaintances told me they'd seen her sitting at a bar stool, staring at her phone as though willing someone, anyone, to call her. But rock bottom didn't hit until I received a call one evening from an unknown number. It was Ella's landlord, informing me she'd been evicted and had listed me as her emergency contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had burned every bridge but still expected me to save her. I didn't. Despite everything, Ella's shadow still loomed over parts of my life. People whispered about her downfall, occasionally reaching out to me to share the latest piece of gossip. It was a strange mix of vindication and sadness, but I knew I couldn't let her existence define my own. So, I took my final step to sever ties. I sold the house we'd shared, my house now, and moved into a new place. It was a sleek condo downtown, close to work and surrounded by the hum of a thriving city. It felt like a fresh start, free from memories of a broken marriage. In my personal life, I began dating again. Tentative at first, I went on a few casual dates, relearning what it meant to connect with someone. Eventually, I met someone who changed everything, a woman named Claire. She was kind, intelligent, and genuine in a way that felt refreshing after years of deception. Ella, meanwhile, had faded into the background. She was no longer my concern, but her story wasn't over yet. Months after my move, I heard through the grapevine that Ella had moved back in with her parents. It was a humiliating return for someone who had once prided herself on independence and ambition. Her family, still ashamed of her actions, treated her presence as a burden rather than a reunion. But even that arrangement didn't last long. Ella's drinking had escalated, and arguments with her parents became a nightly occurrence. Eventually, they gave her an ultimatum: get help or leave. She chose neither. Instead, she drifted from couch to couch, relying on the dwindling patience of acquaintances who pitied her. Her descent was painful to witness from a distance, But I refused to let her struggles drag me back into her orbit. 5 years after the day I discovered Ella's betrayal, my life is unrecognizable from the chaos she created. I'm engaged to Claire now, and we've built a life together filled with trust, laughter, and genuine love. Ella's name is nothing but a footnote in my story, a lesson learned but not dwelled upon. I occasionally hear whispers about her, how she's still struggling, still lost. But those stories feel like they belong to someone else's life. I'm thriving now, stronger than I ever thought possible. Ella thought she'd destroy me, but in the end, her betrayal only proved one thing. The best revenge is living well. And I am.